Welcome to Amadon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amadon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 112 of the podcast, we're talking about Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. I've been wanting to do this book for a long time. I was handed this book or gifted this book. I don't know if she actually gifted it to me, but I took it and I haven't given it back. So I'm going to say she gifted it to me. If she wants it back, I apologize because I wrote in it. But my sister-in-law, who's a very smart person and thinks deeply about work in her work. And so she handed me this book, Deep Work, and said I would enjoy it. And I did. And it's taken a while to get to it, probably because I am still learning what it means to do deep work and to take time to focus and do some things. So this book took a while to read, but I've actually reread it a few times now. And it just felt like great fodder for the podcast to talk about, well, what are the implications not only for bettering ourselves as individuals, but then also thinking about teaching better. And that's what the original fuel for this podcast was, thinking about teaching better, because I'd read books like this. So I'm thinking about the book Rest. I'm thinking about the book When by Daniel Pink. And when I read those books, or Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, like I read those books and I thought, like, there's a lot of times they talk about implications for teaching, or a lot of times they talk about implications for business or other things. And like, this book is by a teacher. Cal Newport is a professor, computer science, I believe, professor. And so he's in similar sort of worlds that I am, but still thinking about this idea of deep work and what does it mean and how do we apply it not only to our own betterment, but also to the betterment of our teaching in our classrooms. And so that's what I wanted to do. And this book seemed prime for that. And it got me thinking back to those old episodes when I was recording them in my closet with this little Zoom recorder. And we're returning to that. So we're doing a solo pod. We're going to talk about deep work. We're also going to have the edition of the album of the episode. It's an oldie, but a goodie. But first, when we talk about a book, as always, just know that I will not be able to communicate the whole value of Cal Newport's book. And even if I did, it would be from my perspective. So in other words, if you like what you hear, get the book for yourself. So you can head to bookshop.org. We'll have links in the show notes, so you can go do that. And Bookshop is a website committed to helping local independent bookstores thrive in the age of e-commerce. So again, we'll put a link in the show notes. But also, hey, this is one you could probably find at a used bookstore. So support those local used bookstores, because those are great places too. Go check it out at your library. Those are good places to support as well. But then also you got your local bookstores as well. So we're big fans of books here on the podcast. So go get yourself a book and read it for yourself. And that's kind of another goal of the podcast, is like, hey, that sounds like an interesting book. I want to go check it out for myself. Go do it. So the argument is that this is an interesting book. So I'm going to set it up. So Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World by Cal Newport, published in 2016, and starts off like a lot of these books do, where there's an idea and they're trying to sell you on the idea that it's an important idea. And I'm not saying that facetiously. I do think this is an important idea, but like saying, hey, the idea of deep work, or as he defines it, professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. So deep work, as Cal Newport defines it, is something that we should strive for and should try to get. And that, like, we're wasting time and effort if we're not doing that, right? And also makes the, contrasts it with the idea of shallow work, where there's non-cognitively demanding, logistical-style tasks often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. And I think of shallow work as things that I think I can do while watching a movie, or watching a basketball game, or listening to some music or a podcast or something. Like, if I think I can do it while doing that, it's probably not deep work. That's an easy check, right? Or something that I'm trying to do in the midst of a conversation. One, I'm not being very loving to that person I'm conversing with, but then two, the work that I'm trying to do is probably fits in this definition of shallow work. And Newport has a kind of a hypothesis. No, not kind of. It is a hypothesis. He says this deep work hypothesis is the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare. At exactly the same time, it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life, which is deep work, will thrive. And so the argument is that in the new economy, you need to be able to quickly master hard things and produce at an elite level, both quality and speed. And so he argues that this depends on your ability to do deep work. And, he uses an example of Adam Grant, who's an author. I don't think we've done a book by Adam Grant on this podcast yet, I have a number of his books. I don't think so. I have to check. We've done a lot of these. We really have. And, maybe I'm missing one, but I don't think we have. Anyway, he uses the story of Adam Grant. Adam Grant has done is very prolific in writing and producing stuff. And Adam Grant had this equation that he put out there, the high quality work produced equals time spent times intensity of focus. So high quality work produced equals time spent times intensity of focus. So so you talk about multiplication. Love it that we're talking about math here. So all time is not equal, right? And so if you're doing deep work for shorter amounts of time, right, you can produce more high quality work than shallow work over a longer period of time. But even so, the shallow work might be so shallow that you're never getting to that same numerical value that high quality work produced, right? That deep work intensity can actually be a multiplicative factor that just overwhelms anything else. And so if I have exercised this muscle, and we'll talk about it kind of going into deep work being like a muscle, if I've exercised this muscle to the point where I can engage in deep work, in some sort of ritualistic fashion, I'm going to be able to produce good work, right? Good work and be valuable in this new economy. All right. So that's the argument. So that's kind of the laying out this argument. And so, overall, talking about one of the ideas that one of the chapters about deep work being valuable. So you can kind of see there's that argument about it being valuable. And so, how do we do that? That we're going to get that in a second. But it also talks about being rare, right? You think about all the different places that are distracting both not only teachers, but students, right? I even think about just the very simple distraction of, changing classes. And we've tried to reduce that, right? And you've seen this movement towards block scheduling where there's longer periods of time within classes, and that, kids rather than when I taught, I was teaching 8 different periods. And I always said it was, by the time you get that 8 period, my students have had 7, if you count lunch, 8, whatever, lots of different opportunities to have a bad day and to get to me having had a bad day, and all the different brain shifting going from, gym to science to social studies to history to lunch to all these art and, whatever, all those different switches, might actually, some of that might even be productive coming to some later ideas, but what is the opportunity for deep focus? So where is there interruption or distraction? Or even too, in sitting in a class, I'm sitting in elementary class sometimes, and I think about all the different interactions that are coming from maybe even the main office where there's, calls for, hey, we need to bring this student, or hey, we need your attendance, or can you send this person over here? Or hey, can you come to the main, whatever, all these calls into a room where a teacher is trying to teach, and those are leading to distractions. So thinking about deep work being rare, think of all the different things that are pulling on both teachers and students, even thinking about teachers in general, email and grading and all these different things that are, again, pulling at attention and getting in the way of focusing in on some deep work. So think about, when does this happen? So if it's valuable, but what are the barriers getting in the way? And then he talks about the principle of least resistance being something to be wary of. And so, and in the book, he says, in a business setting, without clear feedback on the impact of various behaviors to the bottom line, we'll tend toward behaviors that are easiest in the moment. And so thinking about, well, what might be, if I'm a teacher or a student, what might be easiest in the moment? If I have an iPad, it might be like not going to some other app than the thing I should be on to focus in on some work. Or, it might be, to pay attention to some other, distraction. If it's even a book that's in front, like things that are there, it might be easier than the deep focus that I have in front of me. Or if I'm a teacher, it is the grading, the communications via email or text, or all the different things that they need to do, newsletters, or even the, I covered grading. Anyway, I'm sure there's many distractions. And even just having a phone. If you're asked to be on a phone to interact with either the office or parents, I know that we get reminds, which are basically text messages that come out. There's all sorts of different pulls on a teacher's attention. And so what are the easiest things in the moment is to do those interactions and whatever. So basically, I think we can get the agreement that deep work is rare. And even too, when there is free, like if it's after school or other things, what are the other things that get in the way of deep work happening, whether it's standing meetings, these could be PLCs or grade level pod meetings, whatever. These standing meetings that, do they actually add value? We can talk about another book about productive meetings and whatever. But then eventually, this whole idea about busyness being a proxy for productivity. So Newport says that busyness as a proxy for productivity. And so what does it mean to be a productive teacher? And so if you just need to look busy, like there's a bunch of things you can do to look busy, to assign work, to put out the newsletters, versus maybe the deep work is thinking like putting a little extra time into a lesson plan that's connected to, has community connections and whatever. And so that deep work that's involved in that might not show up in regards to quote unquote productivity, because I can't see all the the time that you put into it, right? Or the depth of thought that you put into it. I don't know. So, and then another thing he talks about with this idea of deep work being rare is thinking about technology and thinking about, is it really helping or is it more distracting? So I had a crisis of my own pedagogy. This was pre-pandemic, but I just counted how many different platforms I had students on, and it was like ridiculous. Like I had maybe 4 or 5, because I wanted to expose them to things that they could be using as teachers, but then I'm like, this is really confusing. And thinking about what is each of these, like this platform gave me this piece that I really liked. This platform gave me this piece that I really liked. And this in here, it really talks about, well, is this technology helping or just creating more distraction? And it's like the distraction that even though this platform might do this one, thing really well, like, is it worth the switching from that versus I can use maybe it's a worse version of it, but it's already within a platform that we already use. And so, like, for example, Jamboard was something that was a Google product that my students could easily jump from their Google Drive or Google Doc into Jamboard. And it was Google, it was basically all part of the same platform. And Jamboard, for those of you that know, it didn't have a lot of bells and whistles. Actually, it's getting rolled away, because I think it wasn't as obviously as good as it could be, and maybe people weren't using it. But I used it just because they didn't have to do any different logins, right? They didn't have to switch platforms. They could just jump into it. And as this interactive whiteboard space, it did the job. It wasn't as good as some other things, but it did the job. And so, trying to eliminate distractions and being able to just link from one thing to another, it was worthwhile for me to use that versus jumping into something like a Miro, or I'm sure there's other ones I'm not thinking about right now, or something like a Padlet, or maybe. So making choices about technology and do I want to lead to more distraction or just more complexity? really. And then the last chapter in this, like part 1, it talks about deep work being meaningful, and really some great quotes extracted from Winifred Gallagher. And so I'm going to read one of them. It talks about like just basically like the reward. Deep work is rewarding in of itself when you get into that flow, and you can think about things that you've done where you've had really some intense concentration. I think for me, I've done some like, furniture building projects, or I've done, written some papers, or even published some podcasts where it took some time and focus and attention in order to get that. And then like, it's rewarding in and of itself. Yes, it's nice when people listen to these things, but the deep work, the focus and thinking about and producing becomes it's in itself a reward. So here's a quote. So and again, this is from Winifred Gallagher. Like fingers pointing to the moon, other diverse disciplines from anthropology to education, behavioral economics to family counseling similarly suggest that the skillful management of attention is a sine qua non of the good life and the key to improving virtually every aspect of your experience. And again, next it summarizes who you are, what you think, feel, and do, what you love is the sum of what you focus on. And there's a passage in the Bible that talks about like where's your treasure lies is what you value, right? Time, treasure, talents, all that good stuff. And so that focus, what do we focus on? What we value. So, and that could be the focus of our deep work. Also, there's another quote from Gallagher, and then thinking about what do we focus on? What do we want to spend time on that deep work? I mean, we should be selective. I mean, if deep work is this powerful, if it's this meaningful, then we should focus in on and figure out what's important. So I'll choose Gallagher concludes in the book that Newport pulls this from, I'll choose my targets with care. They give them my rapt attention. In short, I'll live the focused life because it's the best kind there is, right? And you think about that rather than drifting aimlessly, like, what do you focus on? What do you care about? What do you love? And give that your attention, right? And so, and the deep work, the work that we get to do is probably something that deserves our attention, right? So anyway, then it talks about, well, what does this even look like, right? And well, actually, let's back up. So thinking about that and focusing on the attention. So like I think about from my own perspective as a teacher of math teachers, right? What do I want them to focus on? I want them to focus, and I really thought about this for a while. I want my teachers to focus on developing, refining, and enacting messy task lessons or juicy task lessons if you're a reimagining the elementary classroom fan. But messy tasks are these high cognitive, contextually relevant, actually doing mathematics in context. And it takes focus. It takes focus to do that sort of work, not only to for students to engage in that work, but for teachers to think about and construct lessons that actually have a messy task in them. Complex instruction is another thing that I think produces a lot of messy task sort of work. And that is the kind of work where kids are actually doing math that they have seen or is a part of their community or a context that they're aware of, where they actually care about what they're doing. It's not just rote memorization or just algorithms. And so if that is important, well, then how do we create the environment to do that work within the classroom? But then also, how do I create space and time in order to consider, if I'm the teacher, to construct those sorts of things? Because they don't necessarily come out of a textbook. I'm going to have to do some adjusting. It's going to take some concentration in order to make those sorts of experience happen. And so how do we do that? And that's when Newport gets into the rules. And the first rule is to just work deeply. And it's like, thanks. Great, work deeply. But think about this idea of working deeply. It provides this illustration, this David Dewayne, who had this eudaimonia machine, EUDAIMONIA machine, which basically is a building. And in this building, you went from room to room to room to room and thinking about, and each room has a purpose. And so that when you finally get into the heart of the building, you are ready for deep work. So it's like there's like an inspirational space, like a gallery where you get to see work that has been produced through here. So it's like you get inspired, and then you get fueled up with okay, I got my coffee and everything. And like you keep going in and in and in to the point where, all right, now I'm ready for deep work. And I wondered, what is the pedagogical equivalent of this? Like, what does it look like to get ready for deep work? You just can't, snap your fingers and say, let's go deep work. And so in this description of this, it's like, how do you inspire? Like, do the walls have the products of messy task work on it, where, or like the deep questions that students have asked while doing these that have led to the current work that we're doing? Hey, inspired work has led to inspired work, right? And so trying to get there, or even thinking about being reminded of the kind of work that it's done when I've engaged in deep work. Like I have a little stack of publications and things that I've done. And so I can kind of look over it. I'm looking over it right now, that stack, and being like, okay, yep, I'm capable of this. I've done this before. Let's get into that mindset. And then has all these, you think about working deeply, there's all these sorts of philosophies that Newport puts out. Like one of them is a bimodal philosophy for working deeply. And the bimodal is you divide your time, dedicating some clearly defined stretches to deep pursuits and leaving the rest open to everything else. And it kind of reminded me of, and he talks about this book later, in 4 Disciplines of Execution. I've not done that book yet. We will. But it talks about the whirlwind. It's basically I've got my deep work time, the stuff I'm focusing on, and then I've got the whirlwind, which is everything else. And it's you can't control the whirlwind. Whirlwind is out there, but don't let it interfere with the deep work time. So the bimodal time, this bimodal philosophy, this focus time. And so even think in a classroom, a classroom is chaos, right? But at least protect, this time here, this is our protected time for deep work, focus on messy tasks. We're doing this as messy task time. Okay, yes, other times we've got other stuff that are happening. We're, talking about, doing some Khan Academy. We're doing all sorts of different activities. But this time we are working on messy tasks, and we are getting into the mode to do that. Or even thinking about your own schedule. Where are the times, the protected times? And I go back to my my reading of the book When. I really think about my mornings when I work the best, when I'm best at focusing, right? Because Daniel Pink talked about chronotypes and there's different types of people. We got our early birds, we got our larks, and we've got our night owls. I know I'm a lark, I believe. So the mid heart of the morning is my valuable time where I can focus. I'm going to protect that with all I have, right? So that is, if I'm going to engage in deep work, it's probably going to be right there. It's not going to be in the middle at 5:00 at night. And so thinking about, if you have that bimodal philosophy, when are those places you're going to protect? But that also kind of goes into this idea of a rhythmic philosophy. So where you transform your deep work sessions, you have a regular habit. And so, and maybe there's an overlap between what I'm talking about and what that is as well, where, hey, we're establishing a regular habit of when deep work happens. And I think that kind of goes with, Stephen King would talk about this, I believe, in his book on writing, where it was and a lot of writers do this, they have that scheduled time when they write. And I think the quote, and I might be misquoting, but I'm pretty sure I've heard this, is creativity will know where to find me, right? If at every morning and between this time and this time I'm doing this thing, hey, the inspiration will know I'm going to be right there, right? And so it's not I need to wait till the muse hits me. No. I'm going to be here. I'm going to grind away. And if the ideas are there, then we'll just make this into a ritual. And some people need that, right? Some people need that structure. And I know I do at times too. And then finally, there's a journalistic philosophy towards deep work, which is like, hey, whenever you got it, you got to use it. I don't know if this seems like a more chaotic sort of schedule. And so this might be for the teachers, right? Teachers who are like, hey, I got this PLC here. I've got this going on here. Maybe in my day, I'm going to find out, hey, right here, I'm going to have 30 minutes. I'm going to protect that with all I have so that I can work deeply. Or it's like, oh, shoot, I've got 20 minutes that I didn't have before because something got canceled. I'm going to dive in. And so building up that ability to dive into deep work and seeing which of those philosophies not only work for you, but also work for your schedule or work for your classroom as well. And thinking about those different ways. And I like that, and being able to like ritualize it. And so it goes into like some questions. So like once you kind of pick your philosophy, then you're like, all right, where you'll do it and for how long. So I like this when I go into classrooms, and I'll even see like, okay, this is my spot. This is my, my desk, and this is where I get into it. Or when teachers are working with students and be like, okay, get into a place where you can work. And I saw this a bunch of times, sometimes when I go in and watch teachers of my kids, or even when I've been supervising, where it's like, there's not as much, maybe, and this is just me, it seems like the teachers that get it, they're like, hey, if you're working in that, on the floor, like, one, I think that's gross, but if you like it and you get the little lap desk and you're able to do the work, right, engage in the kind of work that we're talking about here, go ahead. Like, it doesn't matter if you're sitting at a desk or on the floor. Like, the point is to engage in the work. And so that, think about where you'll work and for how long. And I can think about that for myself about, I've got like a little, like, I don't know, it's like an old diner booth in my office. It's really uncomfortable. Like, you can't really relax in it. It makes you sit up. It makes you lean in. It actually makes you engage. And if I'm going to do deep work, I do a lot of it sitting right where I'm at right now, doing this podcast, because it kind of forces you into a posture. And it's like, hey, focus, boy. You're here. You might as well lean in and focus. And so then also too, another question is how you work once you start to work. So, are you need the internet, you need books, what do you need in order to, so there's no distractions, so you don't disengage from the work that you're in. Make sure you have all your supplies, and how you'll support your work. These questions really reminded me of something that I used, and I think I developed it coming out of my master's program at the University of Wisconsin, where I did my Master's of Science for Professional Educators, which the program still exists. Loved it. But we had to develop stuff a project or something, some sort of problem that we had with our in our classroom, and develop a solution for it. And the thing that I did was this, we called it a practice monitor. That's right. It was a practice monitor. And so this practice monitor I would use to have students at the beginning of the year. We did it for like a month, where, and just to be clear with my vocabulary, instead of homework, I would call it practice. And so we would then, for the first month of the semester or for the year, we would have students monitor the practice. And so they would keep track of how they did on the practice. And so because it was practice, again, this is why we use the terminology, I just wanted them to have a quality practice, which is to control the things that they control. So, he had an acronym for it. Wow, I'm remembering all sorts of things. PARTY. That they had a proper heading, that it was their name and what the assignment was, the date, all that good stuff. P, proper heading. A, all problems completed. R, required graphs, tables, and equations were included. D, describe, explain, and compare questions were answered in a complete sentence. E, everything is labeled. So you can see those are 5 things that they could control, right? And my assumption, my hypothesis was, if they did the things that they control, they would probably do a good job of revealing their thinking. And then that would allow us in the process to then allow them to correct it when we would come into class. So if they didn't get I didn't understand it, I couldn't do it. All right, we'll try it. You have to have all problems completed. That was one of the 5. And so on the practice monitor, we would keep track of how many of those 5 did they get? Did they get the PARDE? All right, great. And then what was their level of understanding? I would say, I understand it. Yes. I understand it. Yes, but there's some things I didn't. Maybe I kind of understand some stuff, didn't understand everything else. No, but, and then no, but I understood a couple things, or just no, I didn't understand it. So I had them keep track of those things. So how they did it, the quality of their practice, so the party, PARDE, proper heading, all problems completed, required graphs, tables, and equations were completed, describe, explain, and compare questions answered in complete sense, and E, everything's labeled. How did they do in that versus what was their level of understanding? And I had them keep that for an entire month. But and also what we did was, hey, where are you going to do your practice? When, where, what do you need? And just like the same stuff that Newport is saying it. Where, and so after end of each week, we're like, all right, how'd you do? How'd you do in your party? How'd you do on your understanding? Oh, not so good. What was your plan? Let's adjust the plan. And then there was a space for them to adjust the plan. All right, we got it. Adjust the plan. Now let's do it again and do it for another week. All right, how are we doing now? And so hopefully by the end of a month or 4 weeks, they would have a good plan, right, for how to do their work. And again, this was using a curriculum that had complex problems, complex contextual problems that they had to do what I would think is for a 9th grader, deep work. And so I kind of like that. So when we think about working deeply, how do we respond to that? Once we come up with the plan for when we're going to do it, now, okay, so where and for how long, how you'll work once you start to work, and how you'll support your work. And even too, saying like, hey, I need to have some water. I need to have something. I know for me, like here, I've got I got something with caffeine in and some just plain old water. Need them both, right? As I'm going to be engaging in this deep work of this podcast. All right. So work deeply. That's first rule. Second rule was, well, and also in working deeply, they also talk about being lazy, which which is like, hey, that's not the opposite of deep work. No, if you're going to work deeply, you also need to, if you're going to work deeply, you need to rest deeply. And so having that yin and that yang. And I think when we did the book Rest, which was way long ago, that talked about it. Hey, if you're going to do good work, which I think that's this book, the counter of it is that other book, Rest. Okay, how do you rest? And so countering that. And so that's work hard, rest hard. And I think we kind of understand that. But in there, just this idea of being lazy and thinking about all these sort of different things. And he goes really into deep in like what the benefits of downtime are and having some strict, okay, I've worked deeply. Now how do I shut down? I'm trying to work on that. I'm trying to have a launch to my day and a shutdown to my day. I'm not doing the very good job of it because sometimes I just shut the laptop and go, and that's not good. I want to like process. I'm getting better, but not getting there. But that work hard, rest hard is that. Second rule is about embracing boredom. Basically, interruption is a killer. One thing that I really liked about this idea of embracing boredom is just recognizing that the internet and all of this sorts of stuff are just built to, there's so much stuff that's built to distract you from what your intention is. Like, hey, I want to go post on Instagram that one of my students defended their dissertation. Great. Post it. And then like, hey, let's go check to see if anyone liked it to make sure it's posted. Oh, look at Reels. And then like 20 minutes is gone. So, not trying to fill every moment. And that kind of goes right back into that work hard and rest hard. Embracing boredom is not a bad thing. So there's also scheduling digital and analog time. I really like that, not only from a teacher component, like, hey, you need your devices. Hey, you need your devices. Being very clear and explicit about that. And also thinking about that from a teaching perspective as well, because knowing there are traps in there that are going to draw you in. I've been embracing a lot of analog stuff. I we're going to talk later in this episode about analog music, and also my analog planner that I have, or a place for my tasks. I used to do electronic, but it's so easy. Just like, oh, there's another icon, click it, and now we're lost. Versus, shoot, I was supposed to be thinking about tasks. And it kind of goes back to the idea of that least resistant, what did I say before? The least resistant. Principle of least resistance. That's it. The principle of least resistance. And so, hey, there's that shiny icon, and they're made to be clicked. And so you just got to do whatever you can not to click. So scheduling that digital and analog time, and actually establish some sort of rules for that. I know when we talked, there's a book I did about technology and really having those technology like sabbatical days or Sabbath days. So like, hey, on Sunday, I'm not going to do it, not going to check the email, or even being intentional with how you, and this goes into later on, how do you interact with electronics? And so like one small thing that I've found in my phone is, rather than emailing back right away, I might set the email to send Monday at 8 a.m. Because if I send the email, it's too easy for someone to say, oh, they're emailing on the weekend, and they email back, and like, versus, hey, I want to focus on family. Yes, I respond to the email, which maybe I shouldn't have yet, but I had the time to do it. But that thing I'll send out on a Monday rather than on the weekend. And then you also talked about the story of Teddy Roosevelt, which I didn't really understand, because Teddy Roosevelt had this, like, he was so prolific. He did so many things. I don't really think he embraced boredom, but he dove into his interests. But Teddy Roosevelt would establish like his workday, and then he would just be intensely focused on doing his work during that time. And which is, I think, good. Like, just, hey, let's pick our times for our focus, for our time for deep work. Rule 3 was quit social media. And there's two things that I saw there. That was interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about social media and like what benefit is it giving me. And he talked about this any benefit approach to network tool selection, which I think is social media. You're justified in using a network tool if you can identify any possible benefits to its use, or anything you might possibly miss out on if you don't use it. Okay, so that you can hear about, oh, this is why I use Facebook, but then does that outweigh all the distraction that it provides in your life, or the maybe getting upset at things you see, and all the different things? Like, is it valuable? Like, does it have value? It probably has some value, but is that value overwhelming the other stuff, right? So that's the kind of any benefit approach, and he counters that with the craftsman approach to tool selection. Identify the core factors that determine success and happiness in your professional and personal life. Adopt a tool only if its positive impacts on these factors substantially outweigh its negative impacts. And so thinking about what your goals are and what will help those goals, and those are the tools that you should use. And talks about the vital few principle, like, hey, most of the stuff, the benefit is going to come from a few things, not everything, right? So should I be on all platforms, or maybe there's one platform? Maybe I should only be on LinkedIn. It's not as distracting. It doesn't lure me in as much, but still I think I get more interaction there than other places. Maybe, okay? And so I've been reading this book, and as I've been reading this book, this chapter on quitting social media, it's not like, I'm really close to wanting to just get rid of some social media, because I just know I have this addictive personality, and it sucks up time that I'm then losing from what I really want to focus on. And you think about all the different, the reels on Instagram or whatever, stories or whatever it is, all the time that I spend on that, where I'm not spending on the things that I say I value. And it's like, where's the match there? So anyway, that's the one that really keeps hitting me every time I pick up this book. Maybe it'll hit you too. So then the final rule is about draining the shallows. It's basically like, hey, how do we minimize that shallow work is there? It's always going to be there. And so what do we do to again, focus on the things that we should, right? And so let me get to, there's a page I want to think about. This idea of to treat the shallow work with suspicion. Again, shallow work, if we go back to it, shallow work is the shallow work, non-cognitively demanding logistical style tasks often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. Okay? So in that, says to treat shallow work with suspicion because its damage is often vastly underestimated and its importance vastly overestimated. This type of work is inevitable, but you must keep it confined to a point where it doesn't impede your ability to take full advantage of the deeper efforts that ultimately determine your impact. Keep it contained. I think that's what I get. Keep it contained. And so, like, for example, they've talked about, Newport talks about like creating like blocks, like scheduling your day and creating like blocks for what you want to accomplish within your day. And then, okay, so we're going to narrow, and for an academic, like, hey, this is for email, for a writing project, if you have some control over your calendar, or even thinking about blocks in your classroom and your lesson plan. Hey, this is what we're going to do for, the start of the day, the maintenance. We're going to do some warm-up activities, blah, blah, blah. But here we have our block for our messy tasks that we want to jump into. And this is the block for, okay, we wrap that up. Now we want to do some makeup work and whatever. Like scheduling, having a purpose for each block of time in your day. And when I'm at my best and I know what my calendar is, I've got it blocked out. It's like, hey, here's what this activity is for. Here's what this activity is for. And all the roles that I'm fulfilling, like each role has a time on my schedule in order to get the things done that I'm supposed to get done there. And the Pomodoro technique, which is like 25-minute blocks, that's usually my default because I'll do something for 25 minutes and then I'll have 5 minutes where I can do whatever I want. Sometimes I'll do a little stretching. Sometimes I'll go walk down the hall and talk to somebody, or I'll get some water, or just take a little break, look outside, look at the trees, whatever. Do that 5 minutes, come back, go into the next block. And so what also too is that helps you get better at pacing. So if I did that in my classroom and I've divided into blocks and I know, okay, how much time can I really focus in on these messy tasks within my class? Maybe those blocks need to be shorter. Maybe they could be longer. And then how long does these other, I'll get better at pacing. I'll get more sensitive to that rather than like, I'm going to try to do all this stuff in all this huge amount of time. And it doesn't go so very well. So like I have 75-minute classes usually, and usually I run out of time. And so maybe I need to be better at blocking that out and thinking about, okay, so what do I want to accomplish in each block of my class? And I really like that. And also too, he has a plan in there for, hey, it's not fixed, but flexible. And so thinking about how to actually, flex with your day and flex with what's happening in the day. I really like that as well. So, and that goes, so thinking about the rules, work deeply, embrace boredom, quit social media, drain the shallows. This book really has gotten me thinking overall. And that's how I know it's a book that I want to share. So that's why I focus on the podcast, because it's got things I've been thinking about. So like, for example, I've been really into Premier League soccer lately. And I think it's because there's no commercials. Like there's 45 minutes and 45 minutes with the injury time. And it's like, you can really focus in on the flow of the game and, say what you will about, football or what we call soccer. I really enjoy it. And I don't know, maybe there is something about the intention and the focus and seeing, like, it's almost like we're all in it together, because it's like, we're not taking breaks. We're all, it's all actually the ups and downs of the game, and you're kind of into it. Like maybe that is about the attractiveness of that sport, is maybe it's about focus and a desire to focus, right? Or lately I've just been attracted to analog. And I know there's like some books or articles on like the revenge of analog, and analog's trying to make a comeback. And so like I bullet journal. I've talked about that on previous episodes, and really, have refined that to get it to be something I can really work on and keep my tasks in a paper and pen situation in my bullet journal. And then also maybe the vinyl record aspect is that there's an intention there. Like, what do I want to play? It's not going to be what comes up next in a shuffle. It's what comes next on the record that I physically place on the player. And yeah, it's going to end in 20 minutes and I'm going to have to flip it over and intentionally flip it over. And like, hey, I'm making a choice to listen to this, and there's focus there. And so maybe there is something there with those. And again, I'm not, maybe I'm rambling, but there is something about the intention behind those. Anyway, Cal Newport, he wrote a good book, Deep Work, and maybe you've heard him talk about it already. But it's something that's been hanging around in my house and in my head for a while, and I wanted to share it on the podcast. So thanks for taking the time to listen. And again, Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World by Cal Newport. All right, time for the album of the episode. And this album is a cool album, and it's exactly why I love vinyl records, because you can't stream this one, folks. Hold up. Actually, as soon as I got done recording this episode, I went and looked it up. You can actually find R.L. Burnside's Mississippi Hill Country Blues streaming in a lot of places. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Spotify. So it's cooler to be on a vinyl record when you're talking about Mississippi Hill Country Blues, but you can find it elsewhere. It's still cooler on the album. All right, back to the album, the episode. So this is R.L. Burnside's Mississippi Hill Country Blues. I got it during COVID. Our local record shop in town, the End of All Music, they're on the second story of one of the shops downtown on the square in Oxford, Mississippi. And you could call in or order records online from them or call in from them, and they would put your records into this milk crate and lower them down to you so you could pick them up, and so maintain social distancing and all that stuff. But you could give them money, like send them some money, and they would send you records, right? And this is one of them that when during the COVID and wanting to support small businesses, I had them pick out some records for me, and this is one of them that they threw into a box of records that I was able to pick up during COVID. And I'm so glad I got it, because one, I never heard R.L. Burnside before, but the thing is, I have. On a previous podcast, I'll put a link in the show notes, I talk about the Broken Record podcast with the Black Keys. And I think this is, an episode that I recorded while I was in Kenya. Anyways, during the Black Keys episode of the Broken Record podcast, again, that's with Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell, they talk about, the Black Keys talk about their love of Fat Possum Records and their sound. And you listen to the sound of the Black Keys and you're like, where does this come from? This sounds like just some raw guitar. And then you're like, where does that come from? It came from R.L. Burnside. Like, you listen to this stuff, you listen to this album, you listen to R.L. Burnside perform on this album, and you're like, oh, that's the Black Keys. That's where the Black Keys got that sound, or their influence. And you see, like, later on, the Black Keys, I think, did an album of all Junior Kimbrough songs, and then they had their album Delta Cream, which is all kind of Mississippi Hill Country Blues releases. Anyway, I love this album. It's bright yellow. The cover's bright yellow, and the album is bright blue. So if you're an Oxford Charger fan, it's the same colors. But it just, I don't know, it's kind of the stuff that I loved about the Black Keys, and I'm like, where's that main ingredient come from? It came from R.L. Burnside. So just a quick shout out to that. If I believe they still have some of these at the End of All Music, and I believe you can get them online. So I'll put a link to End of All Music. They're not a sponsor, but I love what they do in, if you're a fan of the blues, man, they're a great place to go. So, anyway, that's the album of the episode, Arl Burnside's Mississippi Hill Country Blues. That is going to do it for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Show notes can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 112. Now, for those of you looking for ways to support the podcast, you can subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode, which will allow more people looking for similar content to find it. In addition, you can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download, which contains teaching resources and updates from Amazon Planet. Go ahead and go to amazonplanet.com, look for anywhere where it says join the email list. Hit that button, you'll get the next Amazon Planet download that comes out. Also, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion to the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amazonplanet.com. In addition, I'm always looking for opportunities to work with those who are looking to lead people to love others through teaching. If you have an event or opportunity to share, you can either send an email to joel@amazonplanet.com or head to amazonplanet.com/about to fill out the request a call form. Finally, you can also look to the Amazon Planet Bookshop. There's links in the show notes there. So like if you're looking to find Deep Work by Cal Newport, you can go there. You can find a link, and any of those purchases that are through that link to the bookshop website, those proceeds go to support the publication efforts of this podcast. Production costs, whatever, publication, same thing. Anyway, thank you for spending time on Amazon Planet. Thank you to Cal Newport for a book, a great book, and for Allison for sharing that book with me. I appreciate it. Finally got around to talking about it. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better, be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.